Webcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello, my name is Dr. Yamonja Smalls, DDA State Director of Coordination for Community Services. Given all the important and challenging work you do as CCSs to support people with developmental disabilities, it is important to ensure that service is documented appropriately. Training will provide a basic overview of case note expectations for coordination services. We will have the purpose of case note documentation, expectations for what should be included in an activity note, and give some examples of good activity notes and some that need some work. After you've completed the training, please use the link that will be shared with you to complete the quiz. Upon passing with a score of at least 80%, you will be issued a certificate of completion. Okay, let's begin. DDA's Coordination for Community Services, or CCSs, assist individuals with intellectual and developmental disabilities and their families to learn about and gain access to resources and supports within their community, and assist in a plan for their future. In all the work that you do as a CCS on a daily basis, there may be many challenges to writing good case notes. In the prioritized responsibilities you juggle, you may sometimes feel like you can't find the time to write your notes. Your own attitude about a situation at a time may influence the quality of what's written. Perhaps you've waited too long after the service or activity actually occurred, and it's hard to remember exactly what occurred. This training will provide a core overview of what's needed to ensure that you document appropriately. Case management involves much collaboration where the CCS conducts assessments, facilitates person-centered plan development, coordinates resources and supports for persons in service or seeking to be enrolled in a waiver. The CCSs monitor and evaluate service implementation, and they're always assessing participant and satisfaction amongst family members so that changes may be made to the person-centered plan as needed. The CCS documentation provides interpretations based on the interaction with the participant. It gives a sequential account of what's going on in the person's life. It notes progress made towards achieving chosen outcomes, and it supports quarterly reviews and annual PCP development. Case notes summarize assessment highlighting relevant data. They should provide an accurate snapshot of the person's functioning. They may identify challenges and should point to potential supports and services which may support the person or identify needs that they may have. Good case notes lend to good internal agency follow-up, oversight, and improved service to the participant. This is useful to your CCS agency, but also to the DDA. Issues documented may suggest needed changes to policies and procedures. While the actual sharing of case notes is limited due to HIPAA, participant records, which include case notes, may be subpoenaed by the court system and may also be requested by the participant or designated representative at any time to better understand what has been documented regarding a CCS or other providers of service. Of course, you and your supervisor have access along with the DDA, but it is important to remember that others may require access as well. Activities and progress notes, which are specific kinds of case notes we will discuss, help to optimize referrals and increase communication between the participant, the family, and providers when appropriate. Good documentation supports the person and their chosen team, including providers selected to support the person in achieving their chosen outcomes. When documentation is poor, planning may be inadequate and result in the person not moving along the trajectory to living their good life. The CCS has an ethical responsibility to accurately document services delivered. You must acknowledge your role as a conflict-free service provider responsible for efficiently tracking whether a person is achieving their chosen outcomes. You've all heard the statement, if it isn't documented, it did not happen. As the monitor of the monitor, the DDA is responsible for monitoring your compliance with the requirement for documentation of your services. That said, the DDA audits a sample of case notes from each agency each quarter. Your agency should be reviewing regularly internally as well. It's crucial that these notes are supported with documentation within the LTSS system. So in addition to wanting to be sure that only appropriate billing services are documented in the notes, the DDA is also looking to verify that the service was actually rendered. DDA regional offices, headquarters, CMS, Office of Inspector General, Office of Legislative Audit, all have or can be granted access to LTSS Maryland and are able to review notes as needed for monitoring, auditing, and investigative purposes. Remember, as stated before, you may be required to read your written note in court. Stay professional. If a new coordinator within your agency was assigned to cover your case, would they be able to follow the person's progress? We are working on building functionality which allows CCSs to view progress notes even if the person makes a decision to transfer to another agency. At this time, that's not in place, but we are working on ensuring that it will be in the future. Notes typically have participant details, the type of contact, whether it's a phone call or occurs through a virtual platform, email, fax, etc. While there are multiple ways to think about what needs to be captured in the note, they should provide a detailed summary of the focus issue or reason for the contact and service delivery. It should provide an action plan specifying who's responsible for the next steps and plan for the next meeting or follow-up. Some of the forms of or examples of documentation include activity notes and progress notes, which we're going to discuss shortly, comprehensive assessments, quarterly monitoring and follow-up forms that are uploaded or documented in LTSS, assessments such as behavioral treatment plans may be submitted to the CCS by other team professionals, such as a behavior analyst. You may get assessments from the registered nurse, a physician, etc. We're going to talk a little bit about the first two forms of documentation, which is the core of this presentation. Activity notes versus progress notes. I sometimes hear those terms used interchangeably, and they're very significantly different. So we're going to spend a minute or two just to cover it now. What is the difference between activity notes and progress notes? Activity notes are the billable activities that a CCS documents, which describe what services were performed to support the waiver participant. As before mentioned, activity notes must be supported by other forms of documentation in LTSS in order to be verified during our DDA audit process. Billing, which occurs in 15-minute increments, are only pulled from claims generated from the activity notes, not progress notes, only from the activity notes section. Progress notes are not billed and are not required at this time, although the DDA is strongly encouraging that when you complete your quarterly monitoring form, that you copy and paste, and this is the only time that we're encouraging a copy and paste, that you copy and paste the summary from your quarterly monitoring and follow-up form into the progress note. It makes it easier when it's time to prepare for your annual PCP, for the person's annual PCP, to get a quick overview and summary of what's happened over the annual plan year. Let's talk about what activities are billable. CCSs have the important responsibility, again, to support the person enrolled into waiver services, or for those who are waiting to be enrolled in navigating the DDA waiver system. The Centers for Medicaid and Medicare Services have established guidelines which identifies which activities are billable that are directly involved in the coordination of services for the person. The DDA has issued an updated list of examples to ensure that CCSs appropriately document the coordination services that they perform, and their agencies accurately submit billing claims for payment for those delivered services. We're going to spend a few minutes going over the listed examples. Key billing activities include those that assist people in gaining access to their needed services, assess their needs, activities that support PCP development and involve ongoing monitoring and follow-up on service implementation, and activities that assess satisfaction. The first one, and we're going to cover each one in a little bit of detail. The very first one on our examples list is activities that assist people in gaining access to services that address their basic needs. Activities that a CCS performs, which assist people in gaining access to resources to address these health and safety needs, social and educational wants and needs, are considered billable activities. That's a lot of activities right there under just that one title. The CCS is responsible for helping the person identify and choose providers that may be able to address these needs and wants in their chosen community. CCSs are minimally required to perform quarterly monitoring and follow-up of each person receiving waiver services and of those waiting for waiver enrollment. The quarterly monitoring and follow-up form has 8 specific categories that, when completed, provide a comprehensive update of the person's progress, challenges, and change of status, if any. Remember, this can be completed more frequently, but minimally are required at least once per quarter. We audit this as well. During the monitor and follow-up process, CCSs are reviewing reportable incidents, if any, evaluating need for new or change to existing services due to changes in health and safety needs, supports needed to maintain waiver and Medicaid eligibility, etc. So even though the monitoring and follow-up form may not have every single little thing identified, remember, the monitoring and follow-up is an opportunity to get a good snapshot, a comprehensive snapshot of how the person is progressing in their plan for a good life. The facilitation of the person-centered plan is one of the most important responsibilities the CCS holds. Much of the CCS activities center around planning, collecting information, and supporting the person in developing this plan for their life. There are several key developmental stages of the PCP. During the initial discovery and exploration planning process, you, the CCS, are helping the person figure out what's needed to live their best life. It's not an easy process. The PCP has billable activities not only including planning discussions with the person, but also potential or current providers and other chosen team members. So you're talking with a variety of individuals selected by the person that supports their overall plan development. It also includes ensuring that you successfully enter the PCP into the LTSS Maryland system and that you submit it to the DDA for review and approval. It's understood that there are multiple activities that define and ensure successful development, submission, and approval of the PCP, and all of those are billable activities, including when occasionally, hopefully infrequently, you may have a clarification request sent back to you after you've sent the plan to the DBA. The process of having to revise or respond to that clarification request is, guess what? Billable. So I know that several of these points are going to seem very redundant and repetitive, but we're spelling them out because, as CMS indicates, these are core responsibilities and activities that the CCS is able to bill for. You are responsible for connecting people to providers, programs, and services which address their documented needs and wants. Making these referrals and connections is billable. Again, monitoring and follow-up activities are to occur minimally on a quarterly basis. Again, I'm going to remind you, all 8 areas of the form should be assessed to ensure you have a good comprehensive review of how the person's doing. All activities support this review, including the completion of the actual monitoring and follow-up form in LTSS. All of that is a billable activities. This may include a visit to the provider site to observe the person, a meeting with the person in their home, visits during provision of services approved in the PCP. While these activities should be documented in the activity notes, this is also a time where copying and pasting is appropriate. You can copy the summary from your monitoring and follow-up assessment in a progress note during that quarter. Again, it makes it easy for follow-up to get a good comprehensive review of how the person's performing across their plan year. Contacts with the person, their identified team members, and all others that have information essential to the support of the participant are billable contacts. These contacts may occur in person, over the phone, through virtual means like FaceTime or other video phone technology, mail, email, etc. Contacts with a person's identified team members and others that have information may include the following people. It could include, obviously, their chosen team members. It could include potential providers, school professionals, coordinators from other programs like our SPOT coordinator, and others. Unsuccessful attempts to contact the person or their designated representative are still billable, and it's important to document all such attempts to contact the participant or designated representative. For example, if the participant's responsibility it is the person's responsibility to submit financial documentation to EDD for redeterminations. However, you, the CCS, are responsible for documenting your attempts to support the person in maintaining enrollment. If you have left messages, you will need to document this in your activity note. It serves as a clear documentation that you attempted to support the person in maintaining enrollment. Remember, if it's not documented, it didn't happen. This is something that DBA does audit. When submitting duration of time for any of these attempts to contact a person, whether successful or not, you must accurately document the length of time it took to perform the activity. If you took 3 hours to create and send an email, it's probably not the best way to communicate with the identified person, and it probably will get questioned if the note is audited. Remember, the notes are supposed to be efficient communication of your monitoring and follow-up meetings and or other activities that you perform for the person and services. If you send an email, text, or other message, or receive messages from a person, other member of their team, you are summarizing your communication in your billable activity note. Copying and pasting an email or writing a verbatim statement of the interaction is not appropriate. Activities should always be summarized. Case management support during the last 180 days of a person's transition from an institution are billable as well, whether the person is successfully transitioned into the community or remains in the institution. If for any reason the transition takes longer than 180 days, contact the DDA to discuss next steps prior to billing over the 180 days. The DDA is aware that all the time it takes to enter that great work done by the CCSs into the LTSS system is tedious. It's a required activity and serves as legal documentation of services rendered by you, the CCS. It also documents the progress of the person over the duration of their plan year, as discussed earlier. When documenting the duration of time to enter the activity performed, it's important to remember that you are documenting the duration of time it took to enter the actual activity note. Documentation of the time it took you to enter the activity note in LTSS should be done as follows. Multiple activities may be included for the individual in one activity note. Each activity's entry length can be entered separately as well. I'm going to show you some examples. If you combine the note where multiple activities are entered in one note, each activity must be dated and summarized within that note. Only list the duration of activities for the one person served. Obviously, you can't indicate an activity for someone else's record. Here's an example of the CCS completing an activity. And we're going to show you later how to enter an activity from start to finish. But I do want you to see what it looks like when you complete a combined activity note that indicates the duration of time it took to enter the notes into the system. In this example, and it might be hard to read on the screen, it basically gives the date of activity, the date that you're actually entering all these notes into the system. You are actually going to indicate in this example the date you're going to sit down and tell us or tell LTSS what activity notes you entered and how long it took to enter them. So you're indicating the documentation as the activity. It's a no contact work activity because you're just sitting at your computer entering these notes. And then in the description, you're actually listing out each of the identified activities and the length of time it took you to enter the note. It is not the duration of the actual performed activity. It is the duration of time that it took you to actually enter the note. What you're going to end up doing is adding all of this time together, and it is going to create a total that identifies how much time it took you to enter these listed notes in the LTSS system. You can simply indicate here, as you see here, a start time, and then how long it took you to sit down and actually enter those notes, which when you add up everything listed in your description, in this case adds up to 2 hours and 5 minutes. Let's take a look at an example. So in the actual description area, you're going to, on the 10th, let's use the 10th as an example. On July 10th, 2021, I'm indicating that I am billing for LTSS entry time. I'm highlighting that because I want to make sure it's very clear that you're literally just billing for the time it took to document in the system. We then list each individual activity and the approximate time that it took to enter that activity note. So in this case, we did a monitoring and follow-up on 7/1. That took 45 minutes. 7/6/21, PCP planning meeting. That took an hour. On 7/10, we did a follow-up call with John to review the provider, change of provider information. And then on 7/10, we're actually billing for the time that it took to write this very note. And that took about 10 minutes. When auditing this note, the DDA needs to be able to review the actual activity performed and find supporting documentation that the service was actually completed and verify the duration of time it took to enter the service activity and make sure that that's reasonable. Remember, you're documenting how long it took you to summarize the activity in LTSS, in this case, not the actual duration of the performed service. While the CCS may be engaged in a number of activities that support billable activities, some are administrative and should not be included in the activity note. There are a lot of required trainings made available to the CCSs. In order to perform your responsibilities as a coordinator, the DDA is working to provide better guidance that you can reference at any point and will attempt to help keep it up to date. That said, training is already included in the rate paid to coordination agencies. Do not include training in your activity notes. During COVID-19 pandemic, face-to-face visits in the participant home with providers and with other team members has been greatly reduced and in most cases eliminated. We're now regaining and starting back with our face-to-face monitorings and visits. And as that situation resolves, CCSs will begin to visit people directly again. CCSs should not bill for any travel time to and from these meetings, observations, and visits. As a CCS, you are only billing for the time needed to prepare for and for the actual meeting time itself. Transportation of any person and services is not billable. Now let's talk about what services are not billable. The CCS should not bill for the delivery of any service that is generally provided to the person by a referred provider. For example, the CCS should not bill for showing a person how to use the laundry machine, even if they demonstrated how to do so during a visit to their home. This service may be provided by the personal support staff. So the CCS should not participate in the actual delivery of that service, and if they do, they certainly are not to be billing for that service. If you perform the job of a personal support provider, it is not billable. It actually creates a conflict of interest to do so. Regular supervision with your staff is required to ensure performance is compliant with DDA and CMS requirements for targeted case management service delivery. This is an administrative function. CCSs should not be documenting as a billable activity time spent with a supervisor, either within your agency or when support from the DDA regional or headquarters office staff may be required. DDA headquarter and regional staff are often consulted for support on specific concerns regarding a person in service, and in a supervisory supportive function may provide guidance to support the PCP's development. This is not a billable activity and should not be included in the note as it is considered administrative. From time to time, troubleshooting support is required from LTSS Help Desk and the DDA Help Desk. Again, these are not billable activities. Any services generally performed under the administration of another non-medical program, such as guardianship, child welfare, or child protective services, parole and probation functions, legal services, and special education are not billable. For example, Some activities that are related to the administration of foster care programs, such as home investigations or providing transportation, again, are not billable. This does not refer to when the individual must be referred to these services. Remember, services are billable. Referrals are billable. Contact with non-eligible individuals related to the management of non-eligible persons' care and non-eligible persons' care, unless the person is ineligible status is due to recent disenrollment or they have been referred to for emergency planning, is considered non-billable. That's a lot of words. Let's start over again. And that's one of the reasons why we wanted to make sure there's supporting conversation around each of these items. This is directly from the CMS requirements and guidelines for CS billing, but we know that that language can be a little tedious and confusing. So let's provide some clarity. Contact with non-eligible individuals related to the management of that non-eligible person's care, unless the person's status is due to a disenrollment or they've been referred to emergency planning, is considered non-billable. All that means, let's break it down. What that means simply is that the CCS can bill for activities supporting a person who's attempting to be reinstated in the waiver or has not yet been determined eligible for services, but has been referred due to an emergency situation requiring services. Billing for contact with a person who is not deemed eligible and is not being referred or in the support of someone who is not permissible. So as long as a person's on the trajectory for requiring DBA services, potentially disenrolled and needing to be reinstated, which are activities that are billable because you can have contact with people in that status. Anyone else that isn't on a path to receiving services should not be a billable activity, not be documented as a billable activity. Please remember that activity notes are time-stamped. You enter activity today, and then tomorrow you realize that you forgot to add some additional information that's needed, and you go back to make an edit. LTSS is going to stamp the revision to that note. The CCS cannot perform activities for more than one person at the same time, so document carefully. The system will actually prevent that from occurring. Coordinators may enter all activities for John and Sue in one sitting. However, they cannot enter these activities as occurring at the same time. Again, LTSS will prevent it and you'll get an error message. You can't be at two places at the same time, even virtually. Let's talk about what a good activity note looks like. It's important that those who have access to the client record are able to get a clear, objective overview of what's happening in the person's life. Each note should be clear and brief. Notes should summarize communications as opposed to any verbatim or word-for-word description of what was discussed. Summarize. They should be accurate and complete. The reader should understand clearly what transpired during the time frame noted. Notes should be submitted in a timely manner. It's recommended that notes are entered no later than 24 hours after their service has been rendered, immediately if at all possible. Hey, you're not the clinician, so don't guess or attempt to diagnose the person. It goes without saying that notes should be written professionally, should not include cliches or jargon. Documentation should be based on factual information and data, and stereotypes and prejudice should not be included. Steer away from including your opinion, but explore factual information only. Notes contain participant ID, details, type of contact, whether it's a phone call, FaceTime, other platforms as mentioned earlier. You're looking at the reason. Every time you write an activity note detailing services delivered, or even if you summarize a couple of activities within a progress note, you should always be thinking about the reason you are writing the note. Is this clear in your documentation? For example, the reason I'm going to write this note is to let the reader know that a quarterly monitoring and follow-up visit occurred today with Johnny at 5 p.m. during a FaceTime call. I know I'm going to document some of the changes that were noted since my last assessment. Action plan. When documenting the services provided, it's important to know what next steps to be taken are. Just noting that an HRST, or health risk screening tool assessment, indicated that Johnny is at significant risk for falls leaves the reader wondering how falls will be avoided. Are new services being requested? Is the supervision changing? Is there a follow-up appointment that needs to be completed to assess why he's fallen? Be clear about who is supposed to complete the next steps, and then plan for the next meeting and follow-up. It's important to be sure that you avoid bias by leaving personal feelings and assumptions out of your notes. Documentation should be factual, and if there are unknowns that require investigation, it's a good time to say that you're following up in your plan. Here's an example section of a progress note. Johnny has been self-directing his service for 6 months. He continues to struggle with the management of his chosen staff. 3 staff have quit since the last quarterly monitoring and follow-up, and I'm wondering, is it okay to note that Johnny is unable to supervise his staff and you feel like it's best that he move back to traditional services? Again, stating how you feel he should transition is merely opinion and should be deleted from your note. What might you indicate your next steps given this information? Notes should always be factual. Phrases like, I think, it's my opinion, it seems to me, I assume, probably, are the beginning of opinion statements and should be avoided. In this day and age where social media informs many, it's important to remember to stay professional. Here are a few problem examples. After asking for additional funding for personal care when he was already fully staffed, I told them the plan would not get approved. Bye, Felicia. Again, we don't want to see any opinions, diagnoses, or cliches in the notes. Here's another example. Johnny's parents were pissed off and argued for additional supports, although they had no documentation to support their request. Now, I know that seems silly. You think that those kind of words wouldn't show up in a progress note, but sometimes they do, depending on how we feel. Perhaps we're just having a rough day. So we want to be careful when we're documenting and make sure that you're always keeping it professional. Slang, stereotypes, prejudice, cliches, and other kinds of jargon should not be included in your professional note. One of the key responsibilities of a CCS is to monitor the health and safety of the person. How are services supporting them moving safely through their environment? Are there any threats to their immediate safety? Are there health concerns that need to be addressed? Is the person adjusting well following recent medical procedures? You completed an HRST, you should summarize this note and this in your note and any results that may address safety concerns. Just documenting that you completed an HRST is not helpful. When you are preparing for a person's annual PCP, you should be able to go back through your activity notes and get a good picture of how this person's health has been over the plan year. If you question the results or need additional supports in making the determination, you should note that in your activity note, part of your plan may be to seek coaching from HRS or from a clinical nurse. When providing services, you should always be assessing for change in needs. This should be something you observe for yourself or was reported directly by the person themselves, provider, loved one, or even the chosen team member. Always be sure to begin to establish a plan to address that need. You may need to revise the PCP to request an increase in services, change in providers, or even request a new service altogether. Whether you are monitoring to see how well service is going, whether a person is progressing on their goal with a provider or something else, it's important to try to get a read on the person's satisfaction with their services. If they're unhappy, find out why and try to plan next steps with them to address. You may need to seek out support from other team members. Document. Occasionally, caseload shift. Caseload assignments may be shifted, or another coordinator or supervisor needs to step in to cover while you're absent. They should be able to read your activity notes and your progress notes and get up to speed. Again, this is why those progress notes can be very helpful if they're done at least quarterly, because they give you a nice overview, comprehensive overview of the person's functioning. While no notes are currently observable across agency, meaning if the person is transferred to a different agency, they won't be able to see progress or activity notes. But eventually, progress notes will be viewable with future functionality in LTSS. As previously stated, activity notes are the documentation which results in billing and the required method of detailing service delivery. Progress notes can provide a quick overview when someone doesn't have the time to read all of the activity notes and can still get a comprehensive review. Again, quarterly monitoring and follow-up reports and summaries are a good summary to include in the progress note. Let's talk a little bit about how to enter the activity notes in LTSS Maryland. Again, CCS billing is based on a 15-minute billing unit. Billing for target case management is always going to be based on this 15-minute unit. LTSS does not require, however, the CCS to enter based on this 15-minute increment. You just enter your start time and stop time of the activity, or start time and the duration of the activity, and the system is going to calculate in 15-minute increments and submit based on this approval billing unit. Let's walk through how you will enter your activity notes directly into the system. This is a screenshot of LTSS training environment. Upon opening the person's record, you will click on the Case Management tab. There you will see a tab for activities. Click this tab to begin to enter your activity note. Remember, it's expected that you enter the note no later than 24 hours after service delivery. Click Add Activity on the right. After identifying the date on which the service was rendered, click Continue. Hopefully it's the same day that you rendered the service, but if not, you want to make sure that you clearly indicate the date that the service was rendered, and then click Continue. Identify the category label of the activity. While there are numerous activity labels to choose from, you will want to choose the one that best defines and describes the purpose of the service provided. For example, if you're documenting the PCP planning meeting you held with providers in preparation for the meeting, you may select person-centered plan revision or development from the drop-down menu. Next, you will indicate the type, or rather how the service was rendered. Was it in person, by phone, by letter? Select the option. In the description area is where you're going to write your concise, clear, and fact-based description of the activity service rendered. Is there anything else that would be helpful to know in this note? Was it the service referral request sent to the provider? Was it the CCS needing to note next steps for moving this plan to submission? You want to make sure that what's indicated in the description box is clear. in this case, on 4/22/21, I, the staff, let's say I'm the CCS, entered a specific activity. On 4/22, I spent some time revising my person-centered plan, the person I'm working with, person-centered plan. It's merely documentation because I'm literally sitting in front of the screen and I'm entering into the LTSS template a revision to the plan. And then I'll read the note here that I've entered. Following the plan meeting held on 4/20, Following the planned meeting that I held on 4/21/22, this coordinator, and I'm fine with you using the term this coordinator or I revised the PCP. I'm not going to be that prescriptive. It's not necessary. But we want to make sure that it's very clear what the activity entailed that you're documenting. So this coordinator revised the PCP to reflect the need for increased personal support hours. Carol experienced some regression in being able to put on her own clothes due to her fracture. These increased hours are needed to help her regain her independence for the remainder of the annual plan year. That's just a rough draft. Next, indicate the start and stop time. You can either indicate the start time and duration or just enter the end time for the length of the time the activity took and then save. I know that crunch in the description bar is kind of hard to read at this time, but the most important thing is once you save it, you need to see evidence of success of that record being created. So once it's successfully saved, you will see and receive that confirmation. Please note that if you had performed the activity, in this case on 4/22, but then entered or edited it later, the system documents the date of the most recent change. Again, it's important to enter activity notes no later than 24 hours following the service activity being rendered. But the system will document both the date of the actual activity being delivered and the date that you actually entered it into the system. If for any reason you are required to go back and edit a note, you simply click the edit or delete in the action column. You have 365 days to edit notes following the date that the activity was rendered. In the DDA auditing process, you may be required to edit if the note included non-billable items, inaccurately reflected the billed activity. It's important that your notes are supported in the system by documentation, or it is supported by other documents within the LTS system. This may be a completed PCP, an uploaded behavior intervention plan, the completed HRST, etc. Notes are verified in the audit process by obtaining documentation in the system to support what's been billed. Let's give a few examples. On 6/19, this coordinator called to speak to Johnny in his home during what was supposed to be the time he was with his personal support worker. He picked up the phone and said that he was sleeping. This is the 4th time this has happened. I don't know what the personal support worker is doing, but it ain't working with Johnny. Remember to keep your opinions to yourself. Slang is inappropriate, and the tone of this note is aggressive. On 6/19, the coordinator called to speak to Johnny in his home during what was supposed to be the time he was with his personal support worker. He picked up the phone and said he was sleeping. 3 times earlier this month, I have also documented that the personal supports worker scheduled to work with Johnny was not available during the time scheduled. Is there anything else you might add to this note? I verified the service was billed during the time, although services were not observed to be delivered. although no billing occurred for the 3 previous incidents according to the FMS account. An incident report for 419 has been submitted to report potential fraudulent billing. A meeting has been scheduled for 422 at 3 p.m. to discuss Johnny's continued need for personal supports, his ability to fulfill his employer responsibilities, and additional supports he may need to do so. Remember, it's important that your note be easy to understand, give the reason for a visit, action taken, plan, or next steps, and who may be required to complete them. Here's another one. Held a pre-planning meeting with providers. Johnny and his mother on 2/15 after meeting with my supervisor, Mrs. CCS Super, to discuss his unique needs. Provider X was not certain they would be able to address his needs virtually. Johnny wants to check with provider B to see if they are better able to support him virtually. Please note the date of entry is 4/19, and we're talking about an activity that happened on 2/15. It's expected that all activities be entered into the system no more than 24 hours from the date it's being rendered. All right. I have also highlighted here, after meeting with my supervisor in the CCS to discuss his unique needs. That very well might have occurred. And it's important that you have meetings, regular meetings with supervisor to get clarity when it's needed. However, the time spent with your supervisor or receiving technical assistance or support from DDA is not billable. Do not include non-billable activity in your activity notes. In your progress note, you may summarize, provide a summary that tells more of a story, but only if necessary. Remember, progress notes should provide a comprehensive overview. At 2:15, I conducted a quarterly monitoring and follow-up visit with Jane. Her mother was doing much better and no longer needed the support of her niece for meal preparations for Jane. Miss X actually reported that Jane helps tear up her own lettuce for her salads now. Jane seemed happy that her mother shared her new success. No other changes to her functioning or satisfaction were noted. My next visit will be the comprehensive quarterly monitoring follow-up in June. Just as a reminder, monitoring and follow-up visits are comprehensive reviews. All 8 sections should be completed quarterly. The DDA audits this as well. Here's an example of a progress note. During the last quarterly monitoring and follow-up visit, Jane's mother sustained a sprained ankle and was not able to walk for a month. Jane's niece was asked to come and live with them for the time to assist Jane in preparing her meals. A follow-up focused visit revealed that Jane's mother is better and that Jane actually has made progress in preparing her own meals. Your progress note is not billable, nor is it required at this time. Again, if completed minimally for the quarterly visit, you'll have an easy summary that can be used in preparation for the annual PCP meeting without having to review every individual activity note. It makes it easier for a supervisor or even a new coordinator to get up to speed quickly within your agency. Training, consultation, DDA, and LTSS help desk, reaching out to the DDA, LTSS help desk are not billable activities. Please do not include in the activity note. If you're unsure about whether an activity is billable, ask your supervisor. The activity note is documentation of the very good work you do to support people receiving waiver services or waiting for enrollment, and it is required. It's your responsibility to document them in a timely. Thank you for your attention during this very basic training. If you have questions, please reach out to your supervisor and/or your DDA regional CCS lead. If you're ready, please go ahead and take the follow-up quiz. Upon successful completion, you will receive a certificate of completion. Let me remind you that at any time you may review this PowerPoint, as a copy of it will be sent to your agency for re-review when necessary. Thank you so much for your attention during this training. And again, if you have any questions, reach out to your supervisor and to your regional DBA CCS staff as well. Thank you. The quiz link will be made available within your agency so that you may take it at any time. You have 2 opportunities to take and successfully pass with a score of 80%. However, if for any reason you have challenges and are unable to do so, don't worry. This is really about you getting a good understanding of what's expected for writing a good case note. We want to make sure that, 1, you're documenting the very great work that you're doing in support of people in services, and that we can go back, audit, and verify that what's being billed supports our CMS and DDA requirements. Thank you, and if you have any questions, as mentioned prior, please reach out to your DBA regional staff. Thank you.